The title says it plainly. At my son's wedding, I was seated in the kitchen, my silent revelation. It was not a figure of speech. I sat on a folding chair in the narrow strip of linoleum behind a swinging door, while laughter and clinking glasses swelled on the other side. Music throbbed like a distant heart. Steam from the service line fogged the tiny window above the sink. Someone had left a napkin draped over the back of the chair, as if to mark me as spare, and a chipped plate of cold chicken rested on my lap. The heat in that kitchen held me like a hand. Marinara drifted through the door with a sweetness that made my mouth ache. The florist's boxes leaned against the refrigerator, half empty, a smell of roses and floral tape. I could see the reception hall, a slice of it through the crack when the door moved. String lights, a white cake, a circle of faces. Daniel's laugh traveled in waves and hit the door, made it swing. The sound of his name on other people's lips, louder than anything else, passed right over me. If this story finds you, consider subscribing and tell us where you're watching from. I had paid for the flowers, I had paid for the chairs, I had paid for the bar and the band and for the extra hors d'oeuvres no one else thought of. Years of overtime and skipped vacations had been folded into spreadsheets saved under names like Wedding Final V12 and Vendor Payments. Receipts sat in a red folder in my glove compartment for months. Loyal, dull evidence. I kept them because I wanted Daniel to have something I hadn't had. A proper reception, laughter in a hall, a cake with his name on it. I had imagined, sometimes with a ridiculous childlike certainty, that paying would be a kind of currency of belonging. Money was a language I had learned to speak without thinking. Household budgets, school fundraisers, car repairs. When I paid for things, I thought I was buying my way into the room with him. It turns out money bought tables and candles and music. It did not buy mention in a program. It did not buy the place next to him on the receiving line. The folding chair was the small, humiliating detail. It was beige, generic, the kind you see at community center potlucks. Someone had tucked a white napkin over the back as if to make it look soft. I sat with the napkin's edge rubbing the back of my hand. The plate was chipped along its rim, a familiar chip I've carried like a small fingerprint. One more thing reminding me of how much I had patched and kept together over the years. I took bites not because I was hungry, but because eating felt like doing something normal in the middle of a quiet catastrophe. Margaret, I told myself, keep breathing, keep your face steady. Servers opened the swinging door to check on us, their faces a polite, practiced irritation. We're so sorry about the space, Mrs. Hayes, the catering manager said, smoothing his tie. We thought there was a theme. Behind his words sat a careful smile, an attempt to balance apology with the shrug of the inevitable. A theme. A reason that sounded like decoration and not erasure. Emily brushed past, carrying a tray of petit fours, as if the kitchen were merely functional. Her dress brushed my shoulder. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Susan, Emily's mother, glided in and out like a lighthouse, all easy posture and soft jokes, and she never looked back at the small room the way she looked into the reception, fully present, fully seen. When someone mentioned the program, they smiled at Daniel as if scanning for his parents' names. No one said mine. When the speeches began, I sat on the chair as if wearing a costume my body didn't fit. Daniel climbed onto a small platform and told stories about growing up, the fishing trip, the time he broke his arm. He told everyone about the man he was now, the partner he'd chosen, the future he hoped for. He did not say explicitly the thing I needed to hear, that the woman who'd kept the lights on and the lunches packed and the mortgage paid was there beside him. He had 100 names to say, and mine did not come with applause. I thought I would cry. In rehearsals of this hurt in my head, I had allowed myself full, noisy breakdowns, wailing, slamming doors, incandescent rage. Real life was quieter. There was a strange, deliberate silence inside me that felt less like peace and more like a hinge clenching shut. I did not sob. I pressed my lips together and let the muscles in my jaw hold the sound in. You learn a kind of economy with yourself when you have been the one who pays the bills and answers phones and cleans up messes for decades. You ration your emotions like the last jar of jam. Tonight I spent them on stoicism. I watched their faces and counted the seconds until dessert, until coffee, until the end. The room pulsed with warmth. My hands were cool. After the cake, after the toasts and the bouquet toss, after Daniel and Emily disappeared into a swirl of confetti and congratulations, the staff began to carry plates and bows and memories back to the kitchen. I followed in their wake, a shadow among boxes. Someone put a stack of napkins on my folding chair. Someone else set a chipped plate on the counter. The radio from the reception faded, muffled by the swing of the door. At the threshold, the catering manager said carefully, "Mrs. Hayes, the band and the bar are scheduled to play a little later at the after-party. We can—" He swallowed. "We can arrange for transportation if you'd like. There's a shuttle." A shuttle. As if belonging were a bus you could take. I could have told him in that moment all the bills I'd paid, all the nights I had stayed awake worrying, the hours of overtime that bought the tuxes, the linen napkins no one noticed. I could have said, "I am here because I paid for it." Instead I said, "No, thank you. I'm tired." My voice was level. The words felt like banked coals, reserved, hot. Back at my car, the red folder was slotted under the passenger seat. I drove to the little hotel I had booked that afternoon. Close enough, cheap enough, neutral enough. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something floral that could have been lavender or lingering perfume. I slept in my dress, the lace catching at my skin like a memory I couldn't remove. I woke at 3 a.m. with the taste of coffee and the metallic tang of something else in my mouth. I switched on the lamp and opened the red folder. Receipts, spreadsheets. A line for band, $2,400. Another for florist, $750. Columns of numbers that used to mean security and now felt like documentation of absence. There were also little notes, texts I'd sent friends. I'm so proud. Make sure Daniel checks the cake. Photographs pinned to the folder. My son at 7, teeth crooked, grinning toward the camera. My hands on his shoulders at graduation. A recent shot of him and Emily, their heads touching like a private joke. And then a charge I didn't recognize. A little green message, the kind you never notice until it pinches you. An unauthorized transfer. A Venmo note that read, "Thanks for covering the extras. E." A charge on my card for a line item labeled Champagne Brunch, $600. The math did not compute. I scrolled through months of transactions. A pattern emerged. Smaller transfers, reimbursements never made, favors paid with promises instead of cash. The spreadsheet stopped being testimony and turned accusatory. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at the receipts spread across the duvet like fallen leaves. I could have let the exhaustion take me under. Instead, I put the papers back into the red folder. I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the florist. My voice was clear. "Hello, this is Margaret Hayes. I'd like to cancel the brunch arrangement scheduled for tomorrow morning." The woman on the other end tried to be sympathetic. "We already delivered the centerpieces." "Cancel," I said, calm, final. "Please confirm in writing." She hesitated, then agreed. The second call was to the band. The man who answered had the gravelly, jovial voice of someone used to last-minute changes. He had been paid a deposit. He tried to persuade me that the crowd would be sad to miss them. I listened. I didn't argue. "Cancel," I said. "No need to reschedule." He made a small joke about the music traveling on, and I let that pass like water off a car window. I gave him the booking reference. He said, "I'll talk to the groom." The third call was to the bar manager at the venue. I asked to speak to the event coordinator, and then, when the coordinator came on, I told her to cancel the open bar for the morning brunch. There was an attempt at politeness. "We were already set up," she said. "We can leave the glasses." "Please take them down," I replied. "I don't want it to happen." The buttons of the phone were cool under my fingers. Each cancellation felt like removing a bandage that had been keeping a deeper wound hidden. 3 simple cancellations. That was all it took to make a small, clean break. The calls took 5 minutes. They burned something I hadn't realized was there, the expectation that I would always be the reserve of supply. When I hung up the last time, my hands trembled a little and then they steadied. The trembling felt less like weakness and more like the residue of a key turned in a long-jammed lock. I slept after that finally, but only until dawn, when I woke with the hotel's curtain flapping as a breeze slipped under the window. I dressed in the same dress I had worn last night. My feet ached from standing, and my cheeks hurt from the collapse of old composure. I drove home through neighborhoods still pinned in morning shadows. The air smelled of wet pavement and bakery bread. I carried the red folder into my kitchen, the same space where I had helped scrape off frosting last night, where my own cups sat in the sink, where my hands had learned to make dinners that held the family together. On the kitchen table, I spread the receipts again, alongside the vendor contracts and printed emails. I had ordered everything with care, lists of who had been paid, when, and how much. And then, tucked in the back of the folder, under a stack of contract copies, I found an envelope that did not belong. It was yellowed at the edges, like something that had waited a long time to be opened. My name was written on the front in a handwriting I recognized from years ago, the slanted, impatient loops of Michael's hand. I felt the edge of the envelope before I read his name. There was a heaviness in the air, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Inside was a single sheet folded twice, the creases soft from having been read before, perhaps once or twice, in another life. I hesitated. Not because I feared what I would read, but because I understood that some sentences, when spoken aloud, rearrange the furniture of your life. I smoothed the paper between my fingers and read. "Daniel," it said simply at the top. Then on the next line, the phrase that was precise and brutal, "He isn't biologically yours." I stared at those words until they blurred. The letters seemed to sear themselves into the white of the paper. There was no flourish, no apology that could soften the blow. The sentence was a pivot. It made the world rotate on a different axis. I read it again. "Daniel isn't biologically yours." The words had the sharpness of a medical headline and the intimacy of a confession scrawled in a kitchen at midnight. For a moment I could not reconcile the son I knew, the one who had scraped his knee at 9, who had cried over a broken frog in 4th grade, who had once asked me if he could have the dog, with the man in the letter, as if bloodlines were a single, defining map. There was another page, folded beneath the first. I reached for it with a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else. This one was shorter. It was in the same handwriting. It did not include the clinical line. What it did include was the weight of my marriage, the years of choices and mistakes condensed into a confession. I did not read long passages from it aloud to anyone. I could not. But the small essential truth it contained was clear. My husband had written to admit things that upset the neatness of my life. There were notes of guilt, an acknowledgement that lies had been kept. There was no sweeping absolution. There was only, in one line, a kind of raw honesty that landed like a stone. "God," I whispered, the word coming out of me like a small animal. It was not a sermon or a prayer. It was a sound to mark the place where the floor had shifted. The discovery rearranged the accounting of my life. The columns that once showed only debits and credits shifted to include the unreckoned cost of things you can't charge on a card, the hours of invisibility, The small betrayals stacked like chopped wood. The moments when I had erased myself so a different story could be told. For years I had accepted being peripheral because I believed it was the price of giving my son a future. Now, an unexpected line in an envelope cut through that rationale the way a seam is cut through fabric. I thought of the napkin over the chair, of the way Emily had navigated the room, of Daniel's thin silence when he had thanked the crowd. I thought of Susan's smile. I felt the room tilt. There are two kinds of shocks. One booms like a clap and scatters everything, the kind that erases with noise. The other arrives like an icicle, clear and precise, freezing a single thought into place. This was the latter. It did not make me rage immediately. It didn't let me collapse on the kitchen floor. It gave me a clarity I had not had before, like the way light reveals the dust in a room when you turn on a lamp. I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision about what to do next, not because I was thinking in headlines, but because my body, after decades of carrying other people's needs, wanted to act in a way that preserved me. I did not pick up the phone to shout or to plead. I did not open social media. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the yellowed envelope. I put the envelope into the red folder. Then I took a picture of one receipt and posted it. No caption, just the image. An image of a check, the edges slightly blurred so no numbers or names showed. The act was small and private feeling rather than exhibitionist. It was a marker. I wanted a record that I had been present, that I had paid, that my labor had been real. I closed my phone and sat back. The mailman came that afternoon with a neighborly wave. Mr. Henderson left a bag of cookies at my door and a note. "Sorry I missed the wedding, but I heard it was beautiful." I thanked him and invited him to dinner sometime, an honest, human thing I had not been doing as often as I should. Something else rose in me that afternoon, thin as a sprout pushing through earth. It was not vengeance. It was not even triumph. It was a sense of returning to my bones, to my name. For years I had referred to myself as Mom in conversation, habit and pride wrapped together. Now I wanted to say, without apology, Margaret. I wanted the word to exist for its own sake, not only as a modifier to someone else's life, but clarity can be dangerous without action. Letters can sit like unopened windows and frost over with dust. The red folder could be shoved under the passenger seat again. I could curl into the privacy of my small kitchen and let the world continue to mistake me for background. Instead, I packed the receipts and letters into a small box. I did it slowly, not hurried, because slowing down the moment gave the action weight. I was not going to burn bridges. I was just going to close a drawer and set a new table. There are things you do that feel like a pivot, but are simply preparatory. Putting documents in a box was one of them. The box was ordinary, corrugated, the kind you buy at the office supply store. It held contracts, receipts, the yellowed envelope. I sealed it with tape. I did not write evidence on the outside. The point was not to punish, but to organize. To make clear lines where once there had been messy overlap. That evening, I stood at the kitchen sink and tossed the wilted carnations into the compost. The petals slid away like tiny red traumas. My hands smelled faintly of acid lemon from the cleaner. I wiped the counter until the surface shone. Domestic rituals have a way of returning you to yourself, the way prayer sometimes does for others. In the repetition of washing and stacking, I began to feel the loosening of something tight around my ribs. I did not know, not yet, how Daniel would react when he saw the box. I did not know whether reading what Michael had written would break him or make him furious at his father or at me. I did know this. I would not be the woman who quietly erased herself anymore. I would not, if I could help it, be the person who paid for invisibility. The night grew long and my phone stayed dark beside the bed. I planned in the small, sharp way I always have, lists, quiet schedules. I imagined a dinner not for a wedding but for reclaiming, a tablecloth that was not white but blue, sunflowers not roses, people who had always seen me and stayed. I let myself feel the absurd little pleasure of imagining a table where my name would be said and the head would not be empty. A new resolve is a tricky thing. It can be a flash in the pan, a moment of adrenaline that fades with morning coffee. Or it can be the turning of a stone into place, a slow, irreversible settling. Tonight it felt like the latter. Calmness had replaced the earlier tightness. My anger had clarified into a plan, and the plan felt quieter than I expected. There are practicalities, of course, consequences that ripple outward. The cancellations I had made would mean vendors refunded or not. They might call the groom, they might call the bride. People would ask questions, which is to say, the world is made of other people, and actions you take have edges. I accepted that. I did not relish it, but I prepared for it like one prepares a meal, with attention. When Daniel called that night, it was late. He sounded like someone who had been traveling through fog. I listened to him speak in half sentences about the honeymoon, about flight connections, about how tired he was. He did not mention the brunch. He did not ask about me. I let the silence between his words be a small glass I could hold up and see myself in. "How are you, Mom?" he asked finally. "Okay," I said. I could have answered with the truth. The folded letters, the cancelled brunch, the ache of being nameless in a room packed full of people who loved my son but had never looked at me straight on. Instead, I answered with a version of myself I could tolerate in public. "I'm tired," I said, which was not entirely untrue. He promised to call tomorrow. He did not ask to come by. He did not say he missed me. There was distance, and then the line clicked. I sat in the quiet and let the phone warm in my hand. Around midnight, I carried the sealed box to the top shelf of the closet and slid the shoebox of photographs beside it. The letters were not hidden so much as set aside. They were now something I could touch and open on my terms. I turned out the light and lay in the weight of a bed that had known me for years. Outside, the neighborhood slept. I thought of the folding chair, the napkin, the chipped plate. The images were small and sharp, like needles under the skin. They pricked, and then they faded. I did not fall into dramatic plans of retribution that night. The world of revenge is loud and selfish, and I had never been that person. Instead, I planned carefully. Small acts, precise boundaries, a gathering of people whose eyes found me first, and not only because I was standing in the background. When dawn came, I woke with a steady, uncomplicated hunger, not for vindication, but for repair. I wanted a life where my presence did not feel like an addendum. I wanted to know what it felt like to sit down at a table and be offered the head seat without explaining why I deserved it. There is a peculiar kind of courage required to move forward after betrayal. It is quieter than the courage of duels and loud confrontations. It is the courage of folding laundry in a house that has shifted, of learning that you can make pasta alone and it will be enough, of arranging flowers on a blue cloth and noticing the way the light hits the petals. It is small and domestic and honest. But before those small acts could begin, there were more things to understand. The red folder still waited on my counter. The phone calls I'd made had not, it turned out, closed off all avenues of discomfort. The music had stopped in the hall, but music has a way of creeping back. And somewhere inside the pages of the yellowed envelope were threads that, when pulled, could unravel more than the immediate night. I opened the folder again and took out the list of charges. I traced with a finger the line that read, "Champagne brunch, $600. There were other oddities. A small transfer to house supplies that didn't match any of my lists. A refund that had been promised and never issued." Each entry suggested a conversation I hadn't yet had. Questions with edges. Each entry demanded a response that would either make me smaller or insist that I be seen. I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the receipts like a counsel. The sun came low and warm through the curtains. I felt oddly bright, as if the air around me had a clarity I had not known in years. The heat that had been oppressive the night before now felt like a dry hand drying the last of the mud off a pair of boots. I took a breath and let myself imagine a future table. Not one pushed behind a swinging door, but one set in the middle of a room, the head chair gently occupied, my name on a simple place card. I did not know when Daniel would come home. I did not know what he would say when he saw the box. I did not know what Emily's expression would be when someone whispered the news that had been hidden. There was room in my chest for fear and for a small, steady hope that I could stand in my own light. The kettle clicked off. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower began its Saturday routine. I folded a clean dish towel and set it over my arm, the way my mother used to. Little rituals anchor big changes. I felt, for the first time in a long while, as though the anchor was attached to me. There were practical steps to take, yes, but the first part of reclaiming was the simplest and most private, naming myself. I said my name aloud in the empty kitchen. "Margaret," I said, as if testing the sound. The house answered with the soft tick of the clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. It did not say my name back, but the act of saying it set something in motion. It made a small seam in the air that could be widened. I did not know then how all the threads would knot together. I did not know whether Daniel would be furious, grieving, confused, or grateful. I did not know whether Susan would call to apologize or to defend. I did not know whether the friends I thought I had would stand with me. I only knew the box on the top shelf and the authority of the simple choices I had made, the cancellations, the photographs, the sealed envelope. A revelation, I was learning, is not a single moment of dramatic collapse. It is a slow unpeeling. It is the kitchen on a Saturday morning, sunlight hitting a chipped plate, a napkin folded and waiting. It is the quiet of understanding that the life you had been living was not the only life you can live. I reached for the phone again, not to call for confrontation, but to arrange something smaller and truer. I typed a short list of names, friends who had shown up for small things, neighbors who had left casseroles when my car broke down, Claire who had listened to me cry on a winter night, and then brought soup the next day. I wrote Sunday dinner at the top. I felt a flush of something like relief as I hit send on the first message. There were little replies, affirmative and warm. "Yes," Claire wrote, "I'll bring the salad." Mr. Henderson offered to bring bread. Small people, ordinary gestures, these would be the vessels into which I would pour my next life. They would not fix the hole left by the letters, but they would show me that I was not invisible. At noon, the doorbell rang. It was just the mailman bringing a small stack of envelopes. In the mix was a thick, white envelope with a return address I did not recognize. My name was on it in block letters. I set it down beside the red folder. My hand lingered. The earlier letter had shifted things in me from confusion to the edge of action. This new envelope felt like an unopened door. I could have opened it then. I could have pried into every paper and ripped every seam and hurled them into the street to make a spectacle. Instead, I made tea. The kettle whistled a thin domestic sound. I carried the tea to the table and sat, the envelope between my palms. I did not open it, not yet. Outside, a child laughed, high and tinkling, chasing a dog. Inside, my kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner and coffee, of marinara remembered from last night. The folding chair sat folded in the corner, no napkin on it now. The chipped plate was stacked with the clean dishes. The clock ticked. Time eventually calls things forward. I folded the envelope twice and slid it into the red folder. I stood, cleaned my hands, and reached into the closet for the shoebox. The box was heavier than I expected. I taped it shut and carried it to the car. Driving to the storage unit felt like carrying a heart out into daylight. It required care and the willingness to move something precious into a liminal space. The storage place was a bright, impersonal building with metal doors that clanged. I slid the box into a unit and locked it. The key felt solid in my hand, an ordinary metal thing that nevertheless made me feel as if I had laid a brick in the construction of my new life. On the drive back, I thought of the 3 cancellations and how small acts can make a long arc. I thought of the napkin, the folding chair, the chipped plate. I thought of the yellowed envelope and the way words can tilt an entire life. I felt something inside me that wanted to move. Small steps at first, cleaning the house, calling friends, hosting a dinner. At a red light, my phone buzzed, a number I did not recognize. My heart jumped. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then listened. It was Daniel's voice, clipped and uncertain. "Mom, can we talk when I get back?" he said. "There's a lot I need. I'm sorry. Please." The message ended. Static hummed. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. The light turned green. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio off, the house unfolding around me like a map I had only just learned to read. A revelation can make you small and it can make you bright. The choice between the two is not dramatic. It is mundane. It is washing the counter and setting a blue napkin if you like. It is the way you answer a phone. It is the decision to keep some things in a box and bring other things to the table. By the time I turned the key in my own front door, I had decided on a modest plan for the next week. I would host a simple dinner. I would invite the people who had shown up for me when no one was watching. I would not, for now, force a confrontation with Daniel. He would come back. He had already called. There would be a time for receipts and letters and hard words. There would also be a time for plates of roasted lemon butter pasta and the low hum of string lights over a blue sunflower tablecloth. But that would be for later. For now, standing in my own kitchen with the sink gleaming and the red folder waiting like an unread map, I understood the shape of the choice before me. I could let the revelation make me bitter and loud, or I could let it reorient me toward a life that remembered my name. Either way, I would not sit in the kitchen at someone else's party again as an afterthought. I set the kettle on to boil. The sound in the small house was ordinary and normal. I made a list, small and precise. Call Claire back, pick up sunflowers, find the blue cloth I liked at the thrift store, buy more lemons. I put on music, soft, the kind that might be played at a funeral or a friend's living room, and began to clear the table. Outside through the kitchen window, the neighbor walked his dog. He nodded as I worked. I smiled. It felt like a beginning, and then the phone rang again. This time the number was local, unsaved. My hands were in a bowl of soapy water. I dried them before I answered. The voice on the line was careful, as if stepping through a minefield. "Mrs. Hayes?" a man's voice asked. "Yes. This is the catering company," he said. "We just received a message about cancellations for tomorrow. We're calling to confirm. There's also He faltered. "There's a message from Mr. Henderson asking..." He tried again and said slowly, "We were told to stop the brunch arrangements, but the groom's family is asking why." My mouth went dry. The box on the top shelf felt heavy behind me. The red folder was waiting on the counter like a patient's chart. I set the phone down and listened to the faint hiss of traffic on the street. There are moments when the world seems to hold its breath, when a simple question opens the door to everything you are about to have to face. I picked the phone back up and said, with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to speak without collapsing, "Tell them I canceled it. There's nothing more to say." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of a man folding his response carefully. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Then he asked, in the same practical way that people ask the time, "Will Daniel be informed?" I exhaled. The air left me with a small audible sound. There would be conversations, there would be explanations, there would be hurt, there would be the work of reweaving a life. Yes, I said. He will be informed. I hung up and leaned against the counter. The house was sunlit and quiet, and the kettle had long since stopped boiling. I closed my eyes and felt a steady, hard place inside me thrum, like the backbone of a new chair being built. I had started with a kitchen and a folding chair and a napkin. I had found an envelope that said simply and devastatingly, "Daniel, he isn't biologically yours," and I had reached across that small wound and made 3 phone calls that in some small way declared a limit. The rest would come. Conversations, confrontations, meals, tears, forgiveness perhaps, or further distance. I did not know the shape of the next days. I only knew the current of something moving through me, the quiet, terrible, clarifying force of truth, and my choice to answer it without spectacle. I put the kettle away and carried the red folder to the table once more, the letters tucked inside like a heart of glass. Outside the kitchen window, the day went on as if nothing had happened. Inside, I made a list and began to check things off. The first few tasks were small and domestic. Buy sunflowers, wash the good plates, set the blue cloth on the dining table. They were ordinary things that, when gathered together, would make a new kind of ceremony. I heard the mailbox close at the end of the lane. The dog barked. I folded a napkin with careful fingers and looked at the place where the head of the table would be. For the first time in a long while, I imagined sitting there and not having to explain why I deserved the seat. A revelation is not always explosive. Sometimes it is a series of small eligibilities that add up. A 3-line sentence in a yellowed envelope, 3 phone calls made with a steady voice, a box taped and carried away. Sometimes it is the decision to keep your dignity intact while you make the plan to recover your life. I set the tablecloth on a chair and smoothed it with my palm. The blue was soft, like the underside of a sky. Sunflowers, I decided, would be the center. I liked the way they turned their faces toward light without apology. When the front door opened later that afternoon, and Mr. Henderson's truck rolled up beside the curb with a bag of bread and a grin, I found I could tell him, in simple sentences. I tell him, "Mr. Henderson brought bread," and he laughs like he always does, an easy sound that loosens the corners of a face that keeps careful watch. I found I could tell him, in simple sentences, that I was having people over, that I had decided not to let the house hold only ghosts and obligations anymore. He offered to bring extra loaves. I told him to bring whatever made sense, and to come early to help me set string lights. He arrived with a bag of crusty, warm bread in one hand, and a grin that didn't pretend to understand everything. He understood the important part. He could bring bread, and that meant he could be present. The afternoon fell into the practical pleasures of preparing for a dinner. I rinsed sunflowers while letting water run over my knuckles until the room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh stems. Claire arrived carrying a bowl of salad in a linen cloth, and a look that said she had seen too many things to be surprised by anything I did anymore. She hugged me without question and began sorting plates, as if one of her gifts was the instinct to repair quietly. We moved through the kitchen like hands on a clock, one stirring, one chopping, one arranging. Conversations skimmed like stones across a pond. No deep plunges, but steady skips that kept the surface animated. I roasted lemons because I liked how they caramelize and become something quieter and richer. I made the lemon butter pasta I'd been imagining since the hotel bed. Wide ribbons of pasta folded through a sauce that smelled of garlic and butter and the bright, thin acidity of lemon. There was roasted lemon's edge and the butter's roundness, and bread crumbs browned in a pan until nutty and fragrant. The house filled with steam and light and an aroma that felt like permission. The blue sunflower tablecloth lay across my dining table like an invitation. I had bought it weeks ago at a thrift store on a whim. Just one of those small, impulsive acts that somehow register as a reclamation. Nothing white, nothing neutral, something that turned toward the sun. The sunflowers were blunt and honest, their faces full of light. I arranged them in a simple jar and tucked sprigs of basil around the stems. The forgotten folding chair sat in the corner, clean now, without the napkin draped over it. I had not thrown it away. Objects keep memories the way photographs catch light. I kept the chair because I wanted to remember what I had felt that night, not to live there. Claire set out plates with a confidence born of practice. "Margaret," she said, "this feels right. This is you. This is a proper party." Her compliment landed like a warm hand on my back. Mr. Henderson placed the bread in the center of the table and declared, without irony, that nothing made a dinner feel more serious than good bread. The neighbors arrived with a casserole and a pie, and a young woman I recognized only as a friend of a friend brought a jar of preserved lemons and a story about her grandmother's Sunday dinners. The guests were small and ordinary people who had shown up with casseroles when my car had failed, who had sat with me during a bout of illness and brought magazines, who had fed my dog when I had been away. They did not know the red folder or the box on the top shelf. They did not know the passage of letters and canceled brunches. They knew me in the steady ways that matter, that I cut lemons thin, that I liked black pepper heavy, that I said thank you when someone pulled a chair for me. We lit the string lights early, before it was completely dark, because light arranged itself well against the blue cloth and because I liked the way it made shadows soft. The bulbs hummed a little, and the yard smelled like late summer, mown grass and a neighbor's barbecue drifting over the fence. The table glowed, and I felt, with the small secret pleasure of someone who has habitually stood at the sink, the strange luxury of being looked at and not as background. Dinner went as dinners often do when there is real attention paid to food and to presence. There were pauses for laughter. There were silences that were not awkward but thoughtful. There were stories of small embarrassments and old mischief. Claire told the story of a canoe trip when she and I were younger and the raft nearly came apart. Mr. Henderson confessed to once burning an entire Thanksgiving turkey and swearing never to roast again. These stories were not consolations for anything, but they were stitches. I watched people tilt toward each other and toward me. They listened when I spoke about nothing and about everything. The grocery list for the week, the way my old cat has taken to sleeping on the newspaper, the small satisfaction of folding a napkin into a neat pocket. I did not attempt to narrate my whole life across one meal, and no one asked me to. The evening felt like a test I had passed for reasons that were simple. I made a table where people could be themselves and be noticed. That was a kind of victory, and I let it be enough for the night. Near dessert, as coffee steamed and the last of the pasta was scraped into bowls, the front door opened. He was there a moment before anyone else registered it. Daniel stood on my doorstep with a suitcase dragging behind him, hair mussed, face sallow from travel and worry. He looked smaller than he does in photographs, like someone whose edges had been worn down by rubbing against other people's expectations. He caught sight of the table and paused, as if a sudden hurt had been hugged by the slant of string lights. We had not planned this scene. I had not rung him and said, "Come to dinner now." But perhaps some small current had run through the neighborhood, the rumor that his mother was hosting people, or the simple human fact that he had left a voicemail promising to speak soon. He came in quietly, saying my name like a question. "Mom," he said, and then softer. "What's—" He saw the box on the top shelf only because he looked up. Most people do not look up from the world when they arrive. For a moment I saw the recognition cross his face, like the ripple when a stone enters still water. Then he moved forward, hands in his pockets, and the noise of the dinner shifted. Conversations slid into smaller streams. Plates were set down. Mr. Henderson, who had been slicing bread, offered a piece without looking at anybody in particular, the kind of practical kindness that continues a thread of ordinary life. Daniel sat awkwardly at the corner of the table as if the space for him was uncertain. He did not reach for the pasta right away. He looked at his hands, which were not the hands of the small child who had once insisted on wearing his baseball helmet in the house. They were the hands of a man who had learned how to hold a suitcase and a passport and a camera. He said hello to the guests in a voice that sought normality and found it wanting. I waited until the plates were cleared and the coffee came. My chest was a flat, quiet room. I had practiced in my head what I would say. Brief, precise sentences that did not unravel into argument. When meals finish, people expect either a lull of pleasantness or a lull of fatigue. I wanted neither. I wanted attention that would be frank and finite. I took the box down from the top shelf. Taping the flaps felt like the first step in a ritual I had already performed. Sealing, carrying, locking. The box was not heavy, but when it was settled on the table it had gravity. I slid open the tape and lifted the lid, the smell of paper and old ink rising like dust motes. I took out the red folder and placed it in front of him. "Daniel," I said, with the voice I'd used all those months of paying bills and fielding calls, the voice of someone who had learned to account for things. "There are receipts in here from last night. There are also 2 letters. One is from your father." I watched him without flinching. My face did not plead. He swallowed. The man who had been praised in the reception hall looked smaller now, raw at the edges. He looked at the paper as if it were a map he had not expected to need. "Mom," he began, and then faltered. I held out a small stack of receipts, places where my name and the word paid sat like little blue stamps of presents. "These are the invoices," I said. "You can read them. There's a Venmo note attached to one of them that says, 'Thanks for covering the extras. E.'" He glanced at the note and then away. His jaw worked. For a moment his eyes filled, quick, hot, but he blinked rapidly and looked at the table instead, at the sunflowers. "I didn't—" He had not yet formed a sentence that stood. I did not shout. I did not cry. My voice was steady because steady mattered more than anything else at that moment. "I paid for this, Daniel," I said. "I paid for the reception. I paid because I wanted you to have a night. That doesn't mean I wanted to be kept out of it." He winced as if struck, but the strike was not audible. I'm sorry you felt excluded." He said the words as if testing them. I didn't realize, "Mom, you know I love you." I set the letters between us like a pair of small, blunt objects. I lifted the yellowed envelope and placed it on top. I did not read it aloud in that moment. I let the quiet do what words sometimes cannot do. "There's this," I said. "He wrote that you are not biologically his. You need to know that I knew. I found the letters in the folder last night." I let that land. Daniel's face moved through a pattern I had seen once or twice before, when he was a boy. Confusion, then hurt, then a kind of anger that seeks a target. He reached for the envelope, fingers trembling. For a second I thought he would tear it open and read everything at once. Instead he pressed his thumb against the flap, control and rage braided together in that movement. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. The sentence was a small animal thrown against glass, because there are things that live in people until they are ready to be spoken, I answered. Because I thought it was my job to keep you safe. Because I needed time to hold the news and figure out what it meant for me. I did not tell you to protect you from an upheaval I didn't fully understand. I'm not giving excuses. It's the truth. He looked away, and when he spoke again, his voice was small. He lied to me. He lied to both of us. He sounded younger than his years. I could see him sifting through memory, childhood scenes flipped under a light, every smile and wound reconsidered. "You can be angry at him," I said. "You can be angry at me. You can walk away." I watched him weigh the options like coins in his hand. There was an animal question at the heart of it. Where do I belong? Who will keep me? Who do I give my days to? He put the letters down gently as if they might break. "I don't know what to feel," he admitted. It was a devastating admission because it was honest. It was the honest place from which healing must begin. He looked at me with a vulnerability that let me see his fatigue. "I want to understand, but I also feel betrayed." "That's fair," I said. "Betrayal is messy. It smells like smoke and takes time to air out. But understand this. Betrayal doesn't erase the time we had or the care that went into it. It complicates it. It asks for different things. I'm not telling you how to feel. I'm telling you what I will do." There was a pause like the space between breaths. "What will you do?" he asked. "I'm going to set a boundary," I said. "I will not be the invisible wallet anymore. If you want a relationship with me, it will not be one where my presence is only financial and only acknowledged when convenient. I will not be the one who pays for inclusion that doesn't include me. I will be your mother if you want me to be, but I will not be erased so that someone else's story is easier to tell." He swallowed. Do you want me to leave?" His voice broke on the last word. I considered the folding chair in the corner, the one that had carried me through the reception, and kept the napkin like a small accusation. "No," I said. "I want you here, but I want you present in whole ways. I want honesty. I want to be treated like I am part of your life, not like an invisible ledger. If being present means hearing hard things and accepting responsibility, I am here for that. If it means continuing the way it's been, I can't do it anymore." There was a tremor of relief in his face, like someone exhaling after holding their breath too long. He took a breath and began again. "I never meant for you to feel like that. I was caught up. I didn't think. I thought—" His voice faltered. "I thought things would be managed. I didn't think about how it looked." "Intentions do not always clean up the consequences of actions," I said. "Intentions are not substitutes for presence. You can hold both, regret and responsibility." We spoke for a long time after dinner moved into coffee, and the last of the guests drifted into the night. There were small admissions from him and small admissions from me, not confessions that would solve everything but steps forward. He told me he had been terrified of the conversation with his father. He admitted he had been surprised at how distant he felt at the reception. I told him I had been angry and humiliated and then stunned into silence. I did not let the conversation become a courtroom. I let it be a living room talk, messy, honest, unfinished. At one point he reached for the box and held it the way a person holds land they have not yet inherited, carefully, as if fearful of damaging it. "What do you want me to do with this?" he asked. "Read it," I said, "but read it when you are ready. Do not read it, then come at me with a list of grievances that are meant to cut. If you want to be in my life, then come with your whole self, questions, griefs, apologies, willingness to understand. Otherwise, keep your distance." The door to reconciliation was there, but it had a lintel that required crossing. Honesty, presence, acknowledgement of what had been withheld. There were moments he tried to explain himself. He mentioned money tightness, the pressure of newlywed starts, a Venmo message he had written without thinking. I listened. I did not interrupt. Listening does as much as speaking sometimes. It is a house with open windows. It lets in air and light. When the talk wound down, he stood and hugged me. It was not the long, uncomplicated embrace of a child, nor was it a foreign, formal seizing of silence. It was a human hug, tentative, needing, grateful. "I will read them," he promised. "I will call you after." "I'd like you to come when you can actually stay," I said. "Come when you can be here for a while, not just to pack or to grab something. Sit for dinner or help me wash the dishes. Show up in small, consistent ways." He nodded. There was an agreement in the nod that promised something like effort. It did not promise perfection. Nothing does. After he left that night, after he had taken his suitcase to a neighbor's spare room and then walked back with a quiet wave, I cleared the table with people who had become my chosen family and with Claire and Mr. Henderson, who had stayed until the end. The plates were stacked, the sunflowers bent under the moonlight. Someone suggested a toast. They passed glasses around with that casual ceremony people invent when feelings are large and words feel too small. "To choosing yourself," Claire said, and there was a hush as she lifted her glass. "May we never sit down again, unless it's at the head of our own table." The words landed like a benediction. I raised my glass with the rest of them and felt something like a tide easing. People who had known me in small ways and large leaned toward me and clinked their glasses. Their eyes met mine with steadfastness rather than pity. It felt like being invited in. It felt like being accounted for. After everyone left, I washed the dishes at the sink, the same sink that had held marinara splattered plates the night of the wedding. The water ran warm over my hands and took the crumbs away. I dried the plates and stacked them on the shelf. The folding chair sat in the corner without its napkin, not a throne, but a witness. I did not feel victorious in a brazen way. I felt quiet and steady, as if something fundamental had shifted under my feet and recalibrated me to a truer north. There would be details yet to resolve. Vendors might ask for explanations. People might gossip in quiet corners. Daniel might be angry for a while. He might be understanding. These were not things I could control. I had, however, taken care of the only things I could, my decisions and my boundaries. That night I took the red folder and the letters, and I placed them in the box again. I did not shove it to the back of the closet this time. I set it on the front porch for a minute, and looked at it in the moonlight like one looks at a map you have started to read. Then I took it to the car and drove it to the storage unit, the same bright place with its clanging doors. I slid the box inside the unit and locked the door. The key fit, and the lock clicked. I did not expect the act to transform me, but it did. It was an action with clear edges. Back home, I sat at the table with the blue sunflower cloth under my hands. Dawn had not come yet, but there was the low blue of pre-morning that makes the world quieter. I made a list for the week, tidy things, ordinary work, and tucked the list into my journal. I was not trying to overwrite pain with busyness. I was attempting something simpler, to live with integrity in the small things. In the days that followed, the house filled with the rhythms of life again. I called Claire for groceries and for the small help of an extra hand. Mr. Henderson stopped by to drop off marmalade. Neighbors waved at the mailbox. Daniel texted at odd hours with short, sometimes halting messages. He sent a photo of a sunrise from a hotel balcony and another of a receipt with a question about a line item. We traded small talk and sometimes heavier things. He asked if he could come for dinner the following Sunday. I told him to come when he could stay. When Sunday arrived, friends gathered around the blue cloth once more. We ate roasted lemon butter pasta, the sauce bright and buttery, and we dipped bread in the bowl of oil seasoned with pepper. There were greens earlier, roasted vegetables later. Laughter fell easily. Daniel sat across from me and reached for the sunflowers, turning one stem in his hand like a small, shy ritual. He had read the letters by then. He had come with questions and apologies, and with the beginning of an explanation that wasn't meant to erase, but to make sense. We talked in pieces that week, small, steady conversations that built like a foundation. I noticed, with the slow pleasure that comes after long forgetting, that I could sit and eat and not feel like a shadow. People looked at me when I spoke. They asked about my garden, about a soup I had made, about the lemon tree that lived in my neighbor's yard and sometimes gifted us with fruit. No one needed to be reminded of my contributions. They were apparent in the way a table smoothed linen and set plates. At one point, after dessert, Claire tapped her glass and asked everyone to raise a toast. She smiled at me in a way that was a mixture of fierce tenderness and comic relief. "To Margaret," she said, "who taught us that you don't need anyone's permission to take your place at the table." We clinked glasses, and I felt the weight of the moment in the way people do when a bruise finally fades. It wasn't that the wound had not left a mark. It had. But the mark no longer dictated the whole story. It was a line in a larger text. Later, when the guests had gone and the house hummed with the soft sounds of nighttime, Daniel and I sat with mugs of tea and a quiet that felt companionable rather than strained. He asked questions, practical ones. "Did you keep any copies of the letters? Are you okay?" He looked small in a way I had not seen since he was 10 and lost his front tooth. I held his hand across the table, the one gesture that needed no words. "I am okay," I said. "Better than okay. I'm learning to be here, not behind a swinging door." He put his hand over mine. "Mom," he said, and there was a humility that came with his words. "I'm sorry. I have some sorting to do. If you'll let me, I'd like to be part of that." "I'd like that," I answered. Then I added with the gentle firmness that had become my guide, "But don't mistake me for a bank. Don't assume paying equals presence." He nodded. "I won't." We did not promise each other a perfect future. We promised instead to show up differently. Small terms, calls that weren't only when convenient, visits that weren't only to take things, presents that required more than a deposit. These were things that could be kept, slowly and simply. In weeks that followed, the fallout eased into life. The vendors called, some irritated, some understanding. Emily sent a message that was carefully worded and awkward, offering to come by with coffee, and apologies that read like thin paper. She and I had a few exchanges, one that tasted of ice and then of thaw. Susan did not call for a long time. I do not know if she will. People rearrange themselves in a life, and sometimes they return, and sometimes they don't. I am not bitter about it. I am realistic. I kept the folding chair. It sits now at my kitchen's spare wall, folded and clean. Sometimes a friend will take it out and sit there, because in this house, chairs are chairs and do what they are supposed to do, hold people. The napkin is gone. The chip plate is in the cabinet with the clean plates. It has a place now beside other plates that know how to bear food and stories. Each object is a small testament rather than a wound. Most evenings, when the dishes are done and the light turns soft, I sit at my table and tell myself the truth that used to be hard to say aloud. I am Margaret. I have a life beyond being a ledger or a name in a program. I have friends who bring salad and neighbors who bring bread and a son who is learning to balance his love for his wife with the respect he owes his mother. None of this is neat. It's messy and human and slow. It is good. Once, as the sun slanted through the kitchen window and dust motes spun like small planets, I found myself touching the red folder, as if to feel its texture without opening it. There are still nights when the scene of the reception comes back to me. The music muffled, the napkin, the chip in the plate. But those images are thinner now. They are like the memory of a dream, vivid for a moment, and then less commanding as the day asserts itself. On a quiet morning with the kettle humming and the cat curled against my feet, I wrote a short note in the margin of my journal. To be seen is a practice. Start with the small things. I sipped my coffee and watched the street wake up. There is work ahead, the work of rebuilding relationships, the work of forgiving where forgiveness is possible, the work of staying honest. But there is also the simple, luminous work of living. cutting lemons, setting a blue cloth, calling a friend. If this story finds you and you are standing in the kitchen of someone else's life, behind a swinging door, maybe with a napkin draped over a chair, know this: you can choose to set a different table. It will take time and quiet decisions, and perhaps the slow glue of friends who will show up with bread. It will not be loud, it will be patient, it will be your life. If this resonated with you, leave your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Subscribe for more.